It's been whispered of for decades deep in the hollows of the American heartland, hidden in the kind of shadows that no outsider dare enter. Tonight, you'll hear the story no one wanted told, the buried truths of the most inbred clan on earth. I invite you to lean in. The walls are thin, and the echo of what they did still trembles. They say blood is thicker than water, but in one place, water turned red and everything changed. From the outside, they looked like any old family: creaking farmhouse, battered pickup trucks, children too quiet, midnight laughter, doors that never lock. Behind the curtains, though, something else was growing. Something ancient: fear, secrecy, lineage spiraling inward. The world outside pressed in rumors, a social worker knocking once, an investigator at dawn, but the true horror stayed at home, unseen, locked away behind barbed wire and turned away calls. I am your guide through this forgotten archive, a historian who reads the margins where the worst truths hide. What you're about to hear is not comfortable. It is the slow unraveling of a family soaked in shame, bound by blood, and fated to repeat. A place where the line between parent and child, brother and sister, cousin and lover, it all collapsed. You will hear names, dates, confessions. You'll feel the adrenaline, the hush, the indescribable dread. Because these are not just stories, they are real, lived and waiting, and at the end, you may ask yourself, if this terror lived in my own backyard, what would I have done? Would you have listened to your gut? Would you have stopped it, or joined the silence? This is the truth they tried to bury. The land in question lies on a stretch of lean soil, an old family farm surrounded by dense woods and the cold sweep of night. The kind of place where the air tastes of damp and broken promises. The patriarch was one of the old generation, born in a time when front porch talk and shotgun weddings were still the default. He inherited the land from his father, who inherited it from his father before him: unbroken white fences, unspoken rules, and at the heart of the valley, the family house. From the moment children started arriving, the same pattern repeated. Girls born early, boys trailing behind. The women wore aprons and the men raised their voices in sharp bursts. But the children were never quite like others. They walked slower, looked toward the floor, held their laughter tight. Townsfolk noticed. Old aunties tutted. Something was off. One woman whispered, "They all look so much alike." But she never said more. Inside that house, the walls were thick with the smell of stale cigarettes, cheap liquor, and regret. Everyone knew that discipline was exceptional, the kind of obedience that tasted of fear. The girls learned to cook and clean before they could read books. The boys learned to drive before they stepped outside the yard. And the cousins, the half-siblings, the stepchildren, their relationships blurred. Younger girls looked to older ones as protectors, but were also guided, instructed, shaped. Young boys looked to the men, but secretly feared them. Rules were never spoken, but lived. You don't ask, you don't tell, you don't run. As years passed, the land remained unchanged. The house decayed a little more each winter, the woods creeping closer. But inside, something metastasized. Marriages happened between cousins. Sisters raised their siblings as their own, and children were born into a system that expected silence. A girl born in 1973, a boy in 1975, another girl 1978. And already the pattern: the girls pregnant too early, the boys leaving or disappearing, two half-brothers who looked like twins. A little girl who looked at a man not as an uncle but as something else. They were bound by blood so dense it strangled their identity. Rumors reached the county seat, a neighbor hearing a child's cry at 3 a.m., a truck that carried someone away, a man at the edge of the woods who should not have been there. Social services visited once, but the door slammed before they could ask the right questions. The family lawyer got a call, but never pressed. Someone in the town bar whispered about the farm on the hill, and then looked away. The local newspaper printed a small obituary, but not the full story. The truth was too heavy for the town to carry, and then things changed. A woman walked out one night, clutching her child, looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. She told a story that made the hair stand up on the back of the neck. She had grown up there. She had watched the children born from the same loins that produced their siblings. She had seen men who should have been uncles sleeping with nieces. She had heard the oath, "Blood stays here." She said she tried to warn someone, anyone, but when you're watching your father breed your sister's child, you learn early the price of speaking. She left with nothing but the night's clothes and the thudding of her heart. But her words changed everything. Investigators returned. The farmhouse was boarded. Records were raised. DNA tests, hush. Money, sealed files. The picture emerged. Dozens of children, overlapping generations. Parents, also grandparents. Siblings, also step-parents. The most inbred clan on earth, perhaps, or at least among the most extreme the system ever found. Their family tree looked like a knot that refused to unravel. Branches crossed. Leaves fell into each other's shade. The blood pool was shallow, repetitive, and the effects were there. Children with deformities, behavioral scars, emotional wounds that went far deeper than broken bones. The historian in me trips over the same question over and over. How does a family become this? At what point did love convert into lineage? At what point does the farm stop being land and become prison? The story forces us to ask, are these monsters or are they victims? And if they are victims, whose? Their own? Society's? The silence around them? The buried shame? In the next part, we will go deeper into individual lives within this clan, into the ghosts that walked through the halls, the children who never left, the men who claimed dominion not over fields, but over flesh. Stay with me. There were 15 children born in one decade. 10 of them witnessed something no child should see. One girl, barely 12, found her brother's bed in the dark and didn't know how to scream. She pressed the sheets against her face, covered her ears, but the night never ended. That house had creaked and settled for generations, but now it settled into something far older. Ritual, dominance, death of boundaries. In the quiet mornings on that farm, the adults walked past the children as if nothing was wrong. They passed the bedrooms where cousins slept in the same beds, whispered to each other in the kitchens at odd hours, and left the children to sort out what it meant later. But every memory burrowed deeper. One of the boys remembers waking to swollen hands and bruised knuckles, left by a father who disciplined when there was no misbehavior. One of the girls remembers the silence in the attic, where an older cousin delivered a baby in the dark, and then the baby disappeared. No records, no announcements, just a wail in the night and another secret. The father figure, the patriarch, ruled like a quiet king, not with shouting or violence, mostly with absence. He showed up when he wanted, left when he didn't. The children learned to keep the house ready, to greet company, then to disappear. The mother waited in the doorway most mornings, her eyes hollow and practiced. She'd learned long ago to not ask questions. In one recorded testimony years later, a woman said, she said it was God's will. She said the land needed to stay within the bloodline. The words chilled the investigator, because what they meant was that the line of blood was more important than the line of life, and so the cousins, the half-siblings, moved through life like ghosts. The townsfolk sometimes glimpsed a child on the tractor, hair tangled, eyes shaded with suspicion. A neighbor once said they always kept to themselves, didn't go to town much. But the truth was more terrifying. The children didn't go to town because every time they left, the world asked questions. The world asked about school absences, about bruises, about disguises of fear. The world they knew would interfere, so they stayed. The house had become both cradle and cage. Let's consider one individual, the youngest daughter, born in 1992. She was the product of her father-daughter union. She didn't know it until later. She called him Dad, but he called her my child and my daughter. She looked like the rest. They shared the same eyes, the same nose, the same silent despair. At 14, she tried to escape, left on foot in the woods, reached the county line, flagged a car, but the driver looked at her, didn't ask. He shut the door, the world shrugged. She got home. She learned that escape was a myth. The land stretched around her like a net. At 16, she delivered a child. The child looked at her father the way she looked at him. The pattern completed itself. She learned sorrow. She learned that the way to survive was to smile in front of cameras, shrug when asked where her siblings lived, and say, "We're fine." Fine meant the farm. Fine meant the bloodline. Fine meant no questions. The investigators later found medical records, multiple pregnancies for girls under 18, a remarkably high intermarriage rate among cousins. The children had the same doctors, the same social security filings, the same moves, but always one step behind the world's notice. The most inbred clan on earth, perhaps, lived not in a remote Arctic valley or an uncharted island, but here, under a red clay soil you could drive past every day and never see the horror. Some of the children left eventually. One elder brother moved to a city, got a job, changed his name, but the scars followed. He reported adulthood anxiety, voiced the still, fresh memory of his father's shadow falling across his bed, and kept hearing a woman's voice in his sleep, his sister's voice. The ghosts were everywhere. The survivors said they still feel the watchfulness, the expectation that blood belongs to the house, not to the person, and so they hide, they change their names, they avoid phone books. But the house remains, the land remains, the ghosts remain. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you escape? Would you fight, or would you stay silent? In the shadows of that home, one thing becomes clear: there is no single villain. The cruelty emerges from the system. From the ancestors who insisted blood be kept inside, from the neighbors who looked away, the institutions that visited and left, the society that assumed normalcy. The horror isn't just in the father, or the cousins, or the daughters. It's in the land, the lineage, the refusal to let life breathe. The horror is the pattern repeating itself. The children raised children who were their sisters, their daughters, their mothers. The father died last year. The mother is in a nursing home, quiet, with broken hands and worn-out eyes. Investigators catalogued hundreds of pages of testimonies. The house was sold quietly, the land subdivided. But the family's DNA remains in small towns across the state, weaving into other lives, carrying with it the legacy of silence. The vault has cracked open. The archive of horror is exposed. This is not a story from an ancient time. It ends only when we acknowledge it. In the final section, we'll go into what happened after the exposure, what survivors are doing now, what the legal system found, what the land hides next. Stay with me. The cold legal documents arrived in drips, subpoenas, affidavits, DNA results, sealed records. They told a new story of the clan. In those archives, you found the names of children born to parents with the same grandparents, a lineage so tightly wound it defied conventional family structures. Some children had 3 or even 4 relational ties to the same adult: daughter, half, sister, niece. The terms dissolved, they became just blood. Investigators found the patriarch's journal, scratched pages, blank, ink confessions, the words more horrid than the rumors. He wrote of keeping the seed strong, of ensuring the blood stays pure, of protecting the legacy. These lines, restrained, clinical, made everyone who read them shudder. not merely for what was done, but for what was believed, because that belief shaped choices, shaped lives. The journal traced cycles, births, early marriages, pregnancies at 16, children living in the same rooms as mothers, fathers doubling as uncles. A looping graph of degeneration and shame tucked away under thick oak floors. In the hearings, the youngest survivors testified. One man sat quietly on a wooden bench, his hands balanced on his thighs. He nearly whispered, "I don't remember when the sex started, just that I thought it was normal." He was 12 when he realized the woman who tucked him in at night was also the mother of his cousin and his sister. "Sometimes," he said, "you just stop asking why." The psychological scar is severe, identity dissolved, boundaries broken, childhood stolen. The therapists who later saw him said he had the dissociation of someone born into a world where the rules were rewritten before he learned to walk. Court records revealed the lives of the girls. One testified she was 14 when the father told her, "You will marry your cousin and you'll have his child." She didn't protest. In that house, protest equaled violence or exile. She consented because consent in that world meant telling your mother first. Her son, her brother's son, looked like her. Everyone said so. The boy later told a school counselor that when kids asked why his last name was different, he just laughed. He was 9. He didn't tell. The counselor made notes that never went further. The lawyer handling the case described sitting in the house's living room, wallpaper peeling, the silence thick as a coffin lid. The mother served tea. The children sat in silence. The lawyer asked questions. The father answered with empty eyes. "How many children are there?" He shrugged. "They're all my descendants." Documentation shows the state tried to intervene numerous times. Welfare checks, truancy reports, a neighbor's phone call. Each time, the family found a way to stay one step ahead, moving across county lines, using aliases, explaining away bruises as livestock accidents, treating births as helping a cousin out. The system assumed normalcy. It failed, and now the survivors carry something heavier than fear, responsibility. One young woman changed her name, moved 3 states away, joined a support group, but she still struggles. "When I look at my own daughter," she said, "I see the blood, inherited pattern, and I have to fight it every day. I am her mother, but no one taught me how." She fights not just for her child, but for the children who couldn't fight. The men among the survivors go to therapist rooms and spill things no child should know. Their father's boots on the floor, their sister's voices in the dark, the hollow laughter at parties when someone new came to town. They heard it all. They lived it all. Legally, the case closed with few prosecutions. Statutes of limitations, buried records, compel plea bargains. The land was sold quietly. The farmhouse is boarded up now, an empty shell. Locals pass by and say a hush falls over the place. New buyers bought the acreage but not the memories. Yet the soil remains tainted, not by chemicals but by lineage, and the DNA instances are still there. Registered births that link back, medical records that trace the same lineage lines. Some call it the most inbred clan on earth. Others say on these shores, the label matters less than the reality. The archive of horrors taught us this. Silence is the currency of inheritance. When children cannot speak, the inheritance passes not just genes but trauma, fear, replicating patterns as sure as seasons. The land did not cause this. The people did. But the land watched, record keeper of every whisper, every miscarriage, every child born to a mother who was also his aunt. It absorbed it, it held it, it did nothing. Today, survivors meet on Zoom calls in hushed voices. They exchange stories. "I have seizures," one says. "I can't trust intimacy," says another. They build new definitions of family. They fight to learn what was never taught: consent, boundaries, love that doesn't require blood. They try to rescue the children they will have. They try to rewrite the pattern, and they're doing it quietly, because the world is still so loud and their voice is so faint. This story is not just a record of one family, it is a mirror. If you dig beneath your own roots, what would you find? What whispers were ignored? What houses you passed by where the curtains never opened? The darkness we fear is often just the darkness we refuse to explore. Because when you shine a light, you must be willing to see the shapes it casts. The shapes of children who never had childhood, of fathers who never left, of mothers who couldn't protect. As we close this chapter, remember, the archive is still open. The land still holds its breath. Somewhere, the families who left are still dealing with the inheritance. The world moves on, but blood moves slower. It seeps into memory, into dreams, into the children of the children. What will you do when you walk past a house like that, or listen to a friend whose family is silent, or hear the distant thump of a wall behind which lies a secret? Will you ask? Will you intervene? Or will you carry on, even though you heard tonight? Because in the end, the greatest crime is not what was done, but what was never prevented.